I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 17902 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. This episode is brought to you by the Legacy staff by the Brazos Walking Sticks Company in beautiful Waco, Texas. Go to brazosticks.com, use my name, Mac Payne, spelled M-A-C-K-P-A-Y-N-E, one word, at the checkout, and you will receive a 10% discount off your next order of a Legacy staff or cane of your own design. That's right, they don't have stock inventory out there. When you order a staff or a cane or a walking stick, they personalize it just for you with your own design. You can put your name on it. You can put symbols on it. You can put decals from your branch of service or whatever. If you're interested in honoring your service in the military, go to brazosticks.com and check it out. I'll guarantee you'll be glad you did. In this episode today, I'm going to talk about the United States and Vietnam and what's been happening between those two countries lately. If you listen to what people say these days, you would think that everybody in the whole world hates America for one reason or the other. For all of those who believe that incorrect assumption, I have one thing to say to all of them, and that is, let them come to Vietnam. The Vietnamese love America, despite the fact that we had a war with them. Back in 2015, they polled the Vietnamese people about what they thought about America. 76% of the Vietnamese liked America, loved America. It got even better with the more educated Vietnamese. 89% of those people liked America. That was 5 years ago. If I was a betting person, I'd bet money on the fact that those numbers are even higher now. It's an amazing thing that these two countries that fought a terrible war 40, 50 years ago are now such good friends. There was a story about this situation in the Asia Times titled, U.S.-Vietnam Ties Have Never Been Better. It was submitted by Mr. David Hutt. I'm going to share that story with you so you can get a better understanding about how, what, and where things are between the two countries today. After you hear the story, I'm sure you're going to have the same questions and make the same laments that I did, and that is, why didn't we do this back in the late 1950s? Then there wouldn't be 2 million dead Vietnamese and a black marble monument in Washington, D.C. with 58,276 names of Americans who died in that war. It was a terrible thing, but we've got to move on. Another reason I'm sharing this story with you is because it is so important to know what has happened in the past so that we won't repeat it. We don't want any more monuments in D.C. with all those names on it. We don't want to hear about another 2 million people in another country who die in an unnecessary war. That's why I'm sharing this story with you. So please sit back, relax, get rid of all your distractions. Tell all the noisy people to shut up or get out of the room. Turn off all your devices and listen to David Hutt's story titled, U.S.-Vietnam Ties Have Never Been Better. Coming to you directly from the Asia Times. Let's take a look. Dateline, Hong Kong. Panegyrics were expressed all around And by the way, for all my friends down in East Palmdale, panegyrics means saying something good about a person or a thing. Continuing. Panegyrics were expressed all around when the United States and Vietnam marked the 25th anniversary of diplomatic relations, a remarkable reconciliatory event between the former bitter adversaries. Vietnam is now regarded as America's closest ally in Southeast Asia, while Washington regularly goes out of its way to champion Hanoi and improve its international standing. Today, we can sincerely call one another friend and partner, said U.S. Ambassador to Vietnam Daniel Crittenbrink on July the 11th to commemorate the event, while his Vietnamese counterpart, Ha Kim Nuoc, returned the gesture by commenting on the mutual affection of their peoples. I'll second that statement. As a Vietnam veteran who spent 2 years over there in that country, I have the highest regard for the Vietnamese people. They're friendly, hardworking, good people. Also love that country. Had beautiful beaches and mountains. It was a wonderful place. The whole time I was there, I kept repeating to myself, it's a blanking shame they're having a war in this beautiful place. Finally, peace broke out. Continuing. Now here's where we get down to some very interesting numbers. According to the Pew Research Center, a survey in 2015, 40 years after the end of the Vietnam War, found that 76% of Vietnamese had favorable views of the U.S., which was an even higher 89% among more highly educated people. It was one of the highest such percentages of any country included in the poll. During their 19-year war, 58,276 American soldiers were killed, while Vietnam saw 2 million casualties of troops and civilians from both the partitioned North and South. After the victorious Communist North reunified Vietnam in 1975, Washington maintained its sanctions throughout the 1980s. That was chiefly because Hanoi allied with the Soviet Union, but also for its 1979 overthrow of Cambodia's genocidal Khmer Rouge regime, which America later backed in that country's long and debilitating civil war. I don't see how anybody could back the Khmer Rouge. They were nothing but a bunch of murderers. They killed millions of their own people just because of things like they owned property and maybe had a college degree. The Vietnamese were smart enough to get rid of the Khmer Rouge, and I applaud them for it. It's like getting rid of a poisonous snake in your backyard. Continuing. Relations improved slowly at first. In 1991, Vietnam's communist government opened a POW MIA office in Hanoi, while American tourists were allowed to enter the country months later. U.S. firms were allowed to open representative offices the following year, and in 1994, then U.S. President Bill Clinton lifted the U.S. trade embargo on Vietnam. An arms embargo was later lifted in 2016. The year before, Nguyen Phu Trong became the first chief of the ruling Vietnamese Communist Party to visit America. U.S. President Donald Trump welcomed Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyen Xuan Phuc to the White House in early 2017, the first Southeast Asian leader invited under the new administration. Trump later handpicked Hanoi as the host city for his second round of peace talks with North Korea last year. It was a historic step, one that first required us to face the dark legacy of war between our two nations, said U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in a statement last weekend that referred to the resumption of diplomatic relations in 1995. Since then, we've built a friendship on common interest, mutual respect, and bound resolve to overcome the past and look toward the future, America's top envoy added. Indeed, the future looks bright for Vietnam. Bilateral ties are set to move from strength to strength economically, with the U.S. now Vietnam's second largest trading partner, trailing only neighboring China. Did you get that? Vietnam is now America's second largest trading partner. Matter of fact, I wear shirts today that were made in Vietnam, and they are fine quality shirts. Continuing. Trade has expanded massively from just over $400 million U.S. in 1994 to, get this, $77 billion last year. Even with the COVID-19 84 crisis, trade increased to $26 billion in the first 5 months of the year, up almost 8% from the same period last year. Analysts believe that trade will increase in the coming years, thanks in no small part to American firms eyeing Vietnam as an ideal location to shift operations as Washington seeks to decouple supply chains away from China. Indeed, Vietnam was one of the first Asian countries to benefit from the U.S.-China trade war due to the industrial exodus out of China. I have a feeling Vietnam would be a much better trade partner than China. And the Vietnamese can be a little sly and sneaky, but I don't think they're just outright crooks like the Chinese. Continuing. But a major reason for America's strong reconciliation with Vietnam, which notably hasn't happened with other Vietnam War-era adversaries like Laos, is because Vietnam is now the region's strongest opponent of Chinese expansion, especially in the South China Sea, where Beijing and Hanoi spar over contested territory. For your information, in the South China Sea, they say there is as much petroleum reserves there as in the Middle East. It also has some of the richest fishing grounds in the world, and you know Asians love fish, like I do. Probably the most important factor is that a large percentage of world commerce passed through the South China Sea area. I don't think we want someone like China controlling that traffic. That's another reason we're backing up Vietnam. Continuing. For Vietnam, America provides a superpower buffer and potential protector against China, its historic occupier and long-time perceived threat. The Chinese have always been pushing around the Vietnamese, going all the way back to 40 A.D. Continuing again. Back in 1995, U.S. Senator John McCain, who was held for more than 5 years as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam, was a major driver of resuming diplomatic ties. He noted that it was in the U.S.'s national security interest to have an economically viable Vietnam strong enough to resist, in concert with its neighbors, the heavy-handed tactics of the great power neighbor, referring to China. This has largely been American policy towards Vietnam since, though in recent years the two sides have greatly strengthened their military ties as Beijing has moved to militarize the territory it holds in the South China Sea. In March, a second American aircraft carrier docked in Vietnam in as many years, while the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, a military initiative now under deliberation in the U.S. Senate, could offer as much as $6.9 billion U.S. for U.S. military spending aid among its Asian allies, including Taiwan and Vietnam. I bet the Chinese are watching that very closely, and if the Senate does approve that military initiative, the Chinese aren't going to be very happy. I'm going to cut into this story from the Asia Times titled U.S.-Vietnam Ties Have Never Been Better at this time and finish it up tomorrow in the next episode, so don't miss it. This is Mac Payne here, closing out episode 1792 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these stories. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
about that? Ain't that a mess?